Living in a lake house should have been a peaceful retreat, a serene escape from the daily grind, a place to unwind after a long day. The tranquil sound of the water, the view of the surrounding nature, and the isolation from the hustle and bustle of city life were the main reasons I invested in this property. But what should have been a sanctuary quickly turned into a nightmare, thanks to the actions of my HOA, Homeowners Association. It all started on a bright morning when I decided to check on the lake house. I had been away for a few weeks due to work commitments, and I was excited to return to my little slice of paradise. However, when I arrived, I immediately sensed that something was off. As I walked up to the front door, I noticed that the locks had been changed. Confused and a bit unsettled, I reached for my keys, only to realize they no longer worked. On the door was a note from the HOA, which immediately raised alarm bells. At first, I thought it was some kind of mix-up or administrative error. Perhaps they had changed the locks for maintenance or security reasons, and I simply wasn't notified. But as I read the note more carefully, I realized it was far worse than I could have imagined. The HOA had, without my knowledge or consent, rented out my property. I was in shock. I had always maintained the lake house as a personal getaway and had never given anyone permission to use it. How could they have done this? Who gave them the right to rent out my property, change the locks, and essentially invade my space? It felt like an intrusion, a violation of my privacy, and above all, a blatant disregard for my rights as the owner of the property. The note mentioned that they were renting the house out to a vacationer for a certain period, and the payment would be directed to them, not me. My stomach sank. I immediately called the HOA, expecting them to clarify the situation and apologize for the mix-up. But to my surprise, I was greeted with a defensive attitude rather than an explanation or apology. The person on the other end of the line seemed completely unfazed by my concerns, as if renting out my property without asking for my permission was entirely normal. I explained to them that I was the rightful owner and that I had not agreed to any rental agreement. Despite my insistence, they insisted that it was for the community and for the greater good, essentially trying to brush off my objections. But I wasn't about to let it slide. I demanded to speak to the HOA manager or the person in charge, and after some back and forth, I was transferred to none other than the HOA Karen, the woman who had, apparently, orchestrated the entire thing. Karen wasn't interested in taking responsibility for her actions. She gave me a long-winded explanation about how my property wasn't being utilized and that the HOA had assumed I wasn't going to be around. She even suggested that the rental income could be used to improve the neighborhood. The audacity. Here I was, standing at my own property, locked out, while she tried to justify her actions with flimsy excuses. It was infuriating to hear her downplay the situation. I told her this was a serious breach of trust and that I wasn't going to tolerate someone taking over my property without my permission. But instead of apologizing, she began to gaslight me, claiming that I was overreacting and that everything was perfectly legal. I could tell she was starting to get uncomfortable, but she continued to play her cards as if I were just some disgruntled tenant rather than the actual owner. The more she spoke, the more enraged I became. It was clear she wasn't going to admit she'd made a mistake, and the only option left was to escalate the situation. I told her that I would be taking legal action if the situation wasn't resolved immediately. Her attitude shifted drastically. The confident tone she had earlier started to falter, and I could almost hear her panic as she realized that I wasn't someone who would just let this slide. I wasn't just going to sit back and allow her or the HOA to take advantage of me. The power dynamic had completely shifted. After our phone call, Karen scrambled to reverse the damage. She immediately authorized the rechanging of the locks, and I received an apology, albeit begrudgingly. But I knew that this experience had exposed a deeper issue, an HOA that believed it could run roughshod over its residents' rights, treating them as if they were merely subjects to be controlled. It was a humbling reminder that even when we believe we have control over something as personal as our homes, there are forces that can violate that control without hesitation. What started as a simple check-in to my lake house turned into a battle over my rights, my privacy, and my property. I won this round, but the fight left me with a deeper awareness of the potential overreach of HOAs and the importance of always being vigilant, especially when it comes to what we own. I wasn't going to let this slide. After realizing the audacity of the HOA's actions, I knew I had to take immediate action. I made my way straight to the HOA office. As soon as I walked in, I saw Karen sitting at her desk, calmly going about her work. At least, that's how it seemed at first. The moment I walked through the door, everything changed. She looked up, her face drained of color, and her eyes widened in panic. It was clear she had not expected me to show up in person. There was no denying it, Karen had underestimated me. She thought she could go ahead and make these decisions without any consequences, but I wasn't just going to sit back and accept it. The confrontation that followed was intense. I could see the look of guilt creeping onto her face as she fumbled for words, trying to explain her actions. She started stammering, making excuses that didn't make sense, something about property utilization and community welfare. But the more she spoke, the clearer it became that she had no legitimate justification for what she had done. Karen tried to play it off as if this was a minor issue, as if I should be grateful for the extra income the HOA had supposedly earned by renting out my property. She was completely oblivious to how serious this was. She had no understanding of how much she had violated my rights and invaded my personal space. The more she tried to explain herself, the angrier I got. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation into something insignificant. I made it clear, without hesitation, that I wasn't just going to accept her excuses. I demanded that she reverse everything immediately. The locks needed to be changed back, and the tenants who had been staying at my house without my permission needed to leave. I also made it clear that if the situation wasn't rectified immediately, I would have no choice but to pursue legal action. That's when the shift in her demeanor became undeniable. The once confident Karen, who had been trying to downplay the situation, suddenly turned defensive. Her words faltered, and I could hear the panic in her voice. She tried to keep her composure, but I could tell she was rattled. She probably thought I was just going to be another homeowner who'd roll over when confronted by the HOA's authority. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to back down. The shift in power was palpable. Karen realized she had miscalculated, and it was now too late to backtrack. I could see the panic in her eyes as she scrambled to figure out a way to fix the situation. Her confidence, the confidence she had when she first locked me out of my own property, was gone, replaced by desperation. She knew she couldn't just brush me off anymore. She had pushed too far, and now the consequences were becoming real. Finally, after several tense moments, Karen reluctantly agreed to fix the situation. She assured me that the locks would be changed back, and the tenants would be evicted from my property immediately. I still couldn't believe that someone who was supposed to represent the interests of homeowners could be so reckless. It was baffling to me that she thought she could get away with something like this. As I left the office, the sense of triumph was palpable. Karen had no choice but to undo her mistake. But beyond the satisfaction of seeing her scramble to fix her errors, I realized something more important. This experience had shown me just how much power some HOA members believe they wield over homeowners. The audacity of the situation, the belief that an HOA could unilaterally decide what happens with my property without my consent, was staggering. What had started as a frustrating situation soon turned into a lesson about the importance of protecting your property rights. It wasn't just about standing up to Karen or the HOA. It was about recognizing the dangers of complacency. In that moment, I understood that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even if the people on the other side hold a certain amount of authority. This ordeal didn't just teach me the importance of securing my property rights, it also reminded me of something even more critical, the importance of speaking up when you feel wronged. It's easy to get intimidated when you're up against an organization with more power, but if you don't stand your ground, people will walk all over you. I learned that day that no one should ever take your rights for granted, and no matter how intimidating the situation may seem, you have the power to stand up for yourself. If you're ever faced with a similar situation, don't back down. Don't let anyone walk over you, no matter how powerful they may seem. Your property is yours, and no one has the right to take it away from you. Speak up, take action, and make your voice heard. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself in a situation where others make decisions about your life and your property without even consulting you, and that's a situation no one should ever find themselves in.